So we're going to make sure that we flame our loop all the way over here. And again, the first time you use it, you always want to make sure that you flame the whole thing there. And then when I pull out slides, oftentimes I find there's some little fibers on them. And so one way to get rid of those is just to pass your slide through the flame like that, and it'll just burn off some of those extra fibers here. Now for doing the direct stain, we're going to be taking some of these cells and getting them onto our slides, and we're going to make a smear of the cells in some water. And using a drop of water is great. You can smear cells around in there, but it's going to take a while for that drop to dry out. And so instead, what I like to use is just a loop full of water that is going to give us a really small amount of liquid on there to make your smear in, because that will dry much faster and you won't have to sit here watching paint dry. So I put 2 little drops on there, reflamed my loop because I want to make sure I'm maintaining this aseptic technique, and I'm going to take a little bit of the cells off of this slant for our E. coli. Again, aseptic technique, pass this through the flame holding on to your lid there. Get some of the cells, pass it through the flame again, and put your lid back on. And then I'm just going to come in here and literally take those cells and smear them around in the surface of this slide here. And it's a very faint, diluted, milky color that you should see. If it looks milky, you've probably got way too many cells there. And notice you can just keep coming in here and smearing this around. There is no chance that you are going to pop the cells by putting pressure on them with this loop. At the end of the process, we flame it again to make sure that we sterilize our loop. And just so you can see, I've got a liquid culture of some cells here, and you don't really need to have a drop of water for that because you've already got the liquid in the culture. So aseptically, flame, dip your tube in there and just get a loop full of these guys and put that down on there. Sometimes I like to double dip because your loop full of cells tends to have fewer cells than you would get if you were doing this with your regular kind of culture on a solid medium where you can see the cells. This is going to have a much greater number of cells compared to your liquid. And then we'll just take this and pass it through the flame to dry everything off. And if you look at this, you would see that the cell smear over there is starting to dry out from the edges, kind of like a coffee spot or something like that. And so the cells that were on the outside are sticking to the slide a little bit there, and this slide is going to have that glass or the liquid is slowly going to dry up. While the cells from the first smear are drying, I'm going to show you how to do the same kind of process for our Nigris and Stain, which is an indirect stain. And this one is very different because we're going to take our Nigris in here and we're going to put a drop of this solution off to one side of the slide like that. And then I'm going to come in here and take my culture that is on the slant, aseptically get some of the cells off of the surface of this again. And now I'm going to mix those cells in this drop of nigrosin. And we're just going to keep it on one side of the slide here. Again, mix this up thoroughly so that your cells are going to be spread out a little bit, because we do want to see the individual cells and not the pile of cells where it's hard to distinguish the individual shapes. And then here is where this is very different from the other process, because we're going to take this nigrosin, and I like to take this second slide right here and sort of back it up and get some of the nigrosin on there, and then you just sort of drag it out across the surface of your slide right there. So if you look at this slide, you can see it's really thick over here, and then it was painted out across the surface there. And this one we're just going to let sit there and dry, and we can take a look at our smear that we made for the direct stain. And if you look closely at this, you can see there's a light film on this slide right here. And what we do with this now is we don't want those cells coming off because we're going to be flooding this slide with our stain solution. So we're going to take this thing right here and just briefly pass it through our flame 1, 2, 3 times, and that is going to cook those cells onto the surface. And it's a little harder to see, but over here on this side, that's where we have the broth culture. So you can see a much smaller amount of cells over there versus this one where I was smearing out that colony from the slant. These are ready to go for our direct stain. This one, for our indirect stain with the nigrosin, we're just going to let it sit here, and the dye is going to dry onto the slide. And we'll see later on that this is going to give us two very different images when we look at even the same culture here. So when we're doing our stain for the direct stain, we're just going to take our methylene blue, and I've got my heat fix smear of cells on the surface of this slide right here. And we're going to take this and basically just apply that methylene blue dye onto the surface of our slide right here, trying to cover where the cells are. With this, we're going to let it sit for 30 to 60 seconds, and that will allow a chance for the blue dye molecule with that charge on it to actually attach to particles on and inside the cell here that are the opposite charge. And that's where we get the name direct stain, because here the dye molecules or the chromophore are directly sticking to the cells here, and that's what's going to provide our contrast to allow us to visualize the cells easier against that bright background that we see with our light microscope. So these dyes should have had a chance to stick to the surface of our cells and also those charged particles. So we'll just take this, we'll just take our slide right here and pour some water. You can also use your sink faucet there, but I'm just pouring it on there to rinse off the dye that was on the surface of the slide right there. And so if you look closely, you can sort of see that there's a little bit of color associated with the smears here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a paper towel here and put it down just so you can see the contrast there. So if you look at this, you can see on this side over here, that's where my big smear was. And on this side over here, that's where I used the liquid broth culture. So very different. And what you can do with this is just take your paper towel like that. We also have bibulous paper, but just come in here and pat up and down. Don't wipe, because if you wipe side to side, there's a good chance that you're going to drag or unattach those cells from the slide there, and that's not what we want. We don't want the cells stuck to the paper. We want the cells stuck to our microscope slide. And at this point, if you wanted to, you can also come in here and use your burner to dry off the excess stuff, the excess liquid that is on your slides there. And just so you can see the difference, there is my Nigris and slide, and you can see it's drying down now.